The tiny red camera light blinked from the living room shelf as I realized my husband had been recording our marriage. Still, I slipped my wedding ring with my thumb, letting the red glow touch my hands while I stayed composed. As that light pulsed in the quiet, it turned the room into proof instead of a home. While the same red dot watched the couch where I'd learned to whisper, I understood how love had become surveillance. The same glow caught my reflection in the dark TV, and I realized silence was the role he'd written for me. That's when I chose my verdict. I wouldn't fight him. I'd let the truth keep watching until it judged us both. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and glue sticks. Familiar, clean, but somehow cold. Mark stood by Ms. Alvarez's desk, his smile wide, radiating that kind of polished, perfect energy he always displayed in public. As if he owned the room, as if he was the one who mattered. I stood quietly off to the side, my hands folded tightly in my lap, doing my best to keep my face neutral. He introduced me to Ms. Alvarez as though I was a distant relative, not Eli's mother. His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was deliberate, as if he were the one calling the shots, the one who controlled everything, even my presence in this meeting. Ms. Alvarez started with praise for Eli's reading progress, but before she could finish, Mark interrupted, his voice louder than hers, cutting through her words. "Actually," he said, turning to me like he had the authority to correct her, "he's always been a bit ahead. He's really more of a visual learner, you know?" He smiled at her, as if he were giving her some great insight, and I just sat there, my face growing warm, my hands clenched in my lap. The heat in my cheeks wasn't normal. It never was anymore when I was around Mark. When Ms. Alvarez asked me a question, Mark answered for me. "She gets overwhelmed with school stuff," he said, like parenting was something I only pretended to be good at, like I wasn't the one who'd stayed up late with Eli, reading with him, helping him sound out words. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the mockery that made my skin crawl. Eli, sitting in the chair beside me, was quiet, too quiet. His small fingers fidgeted with the seam of his sleeve, and his eyes stayed glued to the floor, avoiding everyone's gaze. I could feel the tension coiling inside me. His behavior wasn't usual. Something was wrong. But Mark was smiling, the picture of a perfect father, as if nothing was amiss. His cheerful, rehearsed tone felt off, like a performance I wasn't meant to interrupt. Then Ms. Alvarez said it, almost as if she were testing the waters. "Eli's been drawing a lot lately," she said, her voice soft but concerned. Mark chuckled, as if this was just another quirky thing about their son. "Oh, he gets that from me," he said, as if drawing with crayons was some inherited talent. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a lie, like he was trying to take credit for something I had nurtured, not him. Ms. Alvarez glanced at the clock, and her expression shifted. She looked back at me, a quiet concern in her eyes. "Before you go, I need to speak with Mom alone." Mark's smile faltered just for a second. It was the tiniest shift, but I saw it. Then, in an instant, he turned toward the door, his posture stiff, his voice too calm. "Sure," he said. "I'll wait for you outside." As the door clicked shut behind him, I felt the sudden weight of the silence in the room. Something was coming, and I had no idea how to prepare. When Mark stepped into the hallway, the door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed felt physical, like pressure building in my ears. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and indifferent, and somewhere down the corridor a child laughed, bright and carefree, like a different world. Miss Alvarez didn't waste time. She slid a folder toward me with both hands, careful like it was fragile. "Please don't panic," she said gently, "but I'm concerned." My throat went dry so fast I could taste it. I nodded even though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. My palms were damp against my skirt, and I tucked my fingers together, trying to stop the shaking before it started. She opened the folder and turned a paper toward me. Eli's drawing. At first it was just a house, except it wasn't. It was too large, swallowing the page, drawn with heavy lines like he'd pressed down hard. The windows were dark rectangles, but the way he'd outlined them made them look like eyes, watching, judging, waiting. Inside, there were stick figures. One was me. I recognized the hair first, the little curve he always added when he drew me, and then my chest tightened because my face had no mouth, just eyes and a blank oval where words should have been. The absence screamed louder than anything he could have written. Next to me was Mark, not beside, over. Mark was drawn towering, taller than the doorways, taller than the furniture, taller than me. His arms were longer, thicker, and he took up space like he always did in real life, like he filled the entire room even when he didn't raise his voice. In the bottom corner, Eli had scribbled a tiny locked door. It was outlined again and again in black crayon until the paper looked bruised. Jagged lines surrounded it like thorns, like static, like danger made visible. Ms. Alvarez's voice stayed calm, but her eyes didn't move from my face. "Does anyone in the home shout a lot?" she asked. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My first instinct rose up automatically. Laugh it off, make it cute, make it harmless. That was what I'd been trained to do at home, turn sharp things into jokes so no one noticed the blood. "Oh, he's just imaginative," I tried, forcing a small laugh that sounded wrong even to me. "He watches those adventure cartoons, and they do spooky houses." Ms. Alvarez didn't smile back. She didn't let me float away on excuses. She reached into the folder and tapped a note page, her handwriting neat, dated. "He also said something to me," she said softly. "He said, 'Mom gets in trouble for talking.'" The words hit my stomach like a dropped stone. My vision sharpened around the edges, like my body had decided this was a threat. "Mom gets in trouble for talking." I heard it in Eli's small voice in my head, and then, worse, I heard the echo of Mark's calm correction at home, the way he could punish without yelling, the way he could make silence feel like survival. I stared at the mouthless stick figure and felt shame crawl up my neck, not because Eli had drawn it, because he had learned it. Outside, the hallway noise shifted. A cluster of parents passed, shoes squeaking against tile. The door opened a crack and Mark leaned in, smiling brightly at someone behind him. Perfect teeth, perfect dad. Then he angled his face toward me without losing that public grin and whispered through his teeth, low and sharp, "What did she tell you?" Like the truth was contraband, like my fear was his property. Eli buckled his seatbelt too slowly, like the latch had turned into something complicated overnight. His eyes kept darting past me to the school entrance, then to the rows of cars, like he expected someone to appear and pull the door open. The afternoon sun bounced off windshields in hard flashes, and the parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and those sugary hand wipes parents used after snack time. Mark stood outside for a beat, one hand on the top of the door frame, smiling and nodding at a couple of parents nearby like he was running for office. Then he looked down at Eli and said, loud enough for anyone within 10 feet to hear, "Stop acting like a baby. Buckle up." A mom 2 spaces over paused mid-sentence. I felt it, that tiny social sting, like a pinprick on my skin. I reached out instinctively to help Eli, but Mark's hand flicked toward mine, stopping me without even touching me. A silent correction. "Don't." Eli finally clicked the latch. The sound was small, but he still flinched, shoulders tightening like the belt itself had hurt him. I slid into the passenger seat and shut the door carefully. The inside of the car smelled like Mark's cologne, clean and sharp, and a faint sour sweetness from an old juice box somewhere under the seat. Mark started the engine and pulled out smoothly, like we weren't leaving behind a classroom where a teacher had asked to speak to me alone. The moment we hit the main road, Mark exhaled a laugh. "Well," he said, voice bright, "that was fun." I stared out the window at manicured lawns and neat hedges. My jaw locked so tight it ached. My cheeks still felt hot, like I'd been standing too close to a heater. Mark talked like he was narrating a comedy set. Teachers love drama moms, he said. They live for it. One little concern, and suddenly it's a whole thing. He chuckled, shaking his head, as if I had created the awkwardness just by existing in the room. You should have seen your face. I swallowed the humiliation like pills, dry, bitter, one after another, because arguing with him only gave him more material. The radio played softly, some cheerful song that didn't belong in our car. From the back seat, Eli leaned forward a little. His voice came out in a whisper, thin and scared. Did I do bad? My chest tightened. I turned slightly, trying to catch his eyes in the mirror, but he was looking down at his lap, fingers worrying the seam of his sleeve again. Mark answered before I could. You make things bad when you draw weird stuff, he said, still in that easy tone, like he was explaining a simple rule. People get the wrong idea. You want to cause trouble for your mom? Because that's what you did. Eli went very still. The kind of still that wasn't peace. It was shutting down. Mark, I said quietly, my voice careful, he's a kid. The car rolled up to a red light. Mark's foot eased onto the brake, and the sudden stop made Eli's belt tug him back. Mark turned his head toward me, calm as glass. That calm always scared me more than yelling because it sounded like a decision. You're not going to embarrass me with some concern story, are you? He asked softly. Because if you do, it's going to look really bad for you. The light glowed red on his face. My hands clenched in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my skin. I didn't answer. I couldn't. When we got home, Eli unbuckled fast and bolted inside, sneakers slapping the hallway floor as he ran to his room. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and silence. Mark followed me into the kitchen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He kept walking until I was wedged between the counter and the refrigerator, the cold appliance at my back. Give me your phone, he said, casual, so I can see what she sent you. No, I said, and my heart hammered, like it didn't believe I'd said it. Mark's mouth curled. He laughed softly and tapped my phone screen through my bag, 2 light taps like he already owned my choices. Fine, he murmured. Then you won't mind if I schedule the next meeting myself. After Eli went to bed, the house didn't quiet down. It got louder in the small ways that made my skin feel too tight. The ice maker clicked and spilled cubes like a warning. The heater sighed through the vents. Above me, Mark's footsteps crossed the second floor with that steady, unbothered rhythm, like he wanted the sound to register. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the black window over the sink. My reflection hovered there, tired eyes, tense mouth, like a version of me trapped behind glass. Mark came downstairs and dropped his keys on the counter. The clatter was sharp, final, like punctuation. We're continuing this. You confused him today, he said. I turned slowly. I didn't. Don't, he cut in, calm and flat. You made it weird at school. Now Eli thinks something's wrong. Something is wrong, I wanted to say, but my throat tightened around the truth. You should apologize, Mark added, as if he were offering guidance. To me and to Eli for making a scene. It hit me harder than his tone. Even my concern needed permission. Even noticing our son's fear was something I had to justify. Mark walked down the hall and pushed Eli's door open without knocking. The nightlight painted the room blue. Eli lay stiff under his blanket, eyes open like he'd been waiting. Mark's voice changed instantly, soft, warm, public. Buddy, he said with a gentle smile, no more drawings about home, okay? Eli's shoulders curled inward. He nodded, small and quick, like agreement was the only safe answer. His eyes flicked to me for half a second, then dropped. Family stuff stays private, Mark said, still smiling like it was a sweet lesson. When he backed out, the smile fell off his face the moment the door nearly closed. I followed him back toward the kitchen, heart hammering. Can we talk privately? I asked, hating how careful my voice sounded. Mark sighed dramatically, like I'd ruined his evening. You always do this, he said. You push until I have to be the bad guy. I'm scared, I whispered. He gave a small, dismissive laugh. There it is, the drama. Later, when the house finally settled, no TV noise, no movement upstairs, I slipped into Eli's room. It smelled like kid shampoo and clean sheets. I crouched and reached under the bed, not even sure why. My fingers found a crayon pack shoved deep near the wall, wrapper bent and rewrapped like something illegal. My throat burned. He'd learned to hide harmless things the way I hid my feelings. I put it back exactly where it was and walked to the living room to turn off the last lamp. Streetlight stripes lay across the carpet. I reached for the switch, then froze. A tiny red glow sat on the living room shelf, steady and unwavering. Not a toy, not a reflection, a camera. And my stomach dropped with the sick understanding that I hadn't been alone in my own home for a long time. The red dot stared back at me from the shelf, steady and cold, and my skin went numb like I'd opened the wrong door in my own home. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The living room looked normal. Family photos, folded throw blanket, Mark's favorite candle unlit, but that tiny light made everything feel staged, like the house had been smiling while it watched me. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam shook as it swept across the shelf. The device was tucked behind picture frames, Eli's school portrait, a Christmas photo where Mark's arm looked like it was around me, but now felt more like it was holding me in place. The lens faced the couch, the exact spot where I used to sit late at night, covering my mouth with my hands so Eli wouldn't hear me cry. My stomach rolled. I moved the flashlight lower, scanning the room like I was in someone else's space. The entertainment center, the potted plant Mark insisted made us look welcoming. The corner with the Wi-Fi router, all cords and blinking lights. And there it was. Another device, smaller, tucked near the router, angled perfectly toward the couch. Not a baby monitor, not a door camera. A camera aimed at the center of our life. Footsteps sounded upstairs, then down. Mark's, unhurried. Keys clinked. He walked in and stopped when he saw me. His eyes flicked to the shelf, then back to my face, and instead of shock, he smiled like a man proud of his solution. "You found it?" he said. "Are you recording us?" My voice came out thin. "It's for safety," he replied, calm as if he were explaining insurance. "You get emotional. I need proof." "Proof of what?" I whispered, heat rising in my face. "That I, cry sometimes." He gave a soft laugh. "See? This is exactly why." Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to something that felt like a threat without ever sounding like one. "And if you ever try to leave," he said, "I'll show people what you're really like." The humiliation hit like nausea. My marriage wasn't a partnership. It was surveillance, evidence, a story he was filming and editing while I tried to stay quiet enough to survive it. After he walked away, I stood in the dim living room, phone glowing in my hand. I opened our shared cloud account, the one labeled Family. My login was saved. Of course it was. I tapped through folders until I saw it. Incidents. My fingers went numb as I opened it. Rows of clipped videos, dated, titled like exhibits, my worst moments captured in thumbnails, my face wet with tears, my mouth open mid-plea, my shoulders hunched. I opened one and watched the cuts, my words stripped of context, my pain rearranged to look unstable. Then the newest file loaded at the top, dated yesterday, Eli drawing talk. My blood turned to ice. Mark hadn't just been watching me. He'd been watching our son, too. My hands shook so hard I could barely type Ms. Alvarez's email address. The glow of my phone made the living room feel colder, like the light was accusing me. I sat on the edge of the couch, the same couch those cameras had been aimed at, and stared at the "to" uncool line until my eyes blurred. I hated the shame that rose in my throat. Asking for help felt like confessing a failure. Mark had trained me to believe that reaching outside our home was betrayal, that if I told anyone I'd be making drama, that I'd be the problem. But my thumbs moved anyway, clumsy and trembling. I wrote a short message, careful, neutral, almost businesslike. because anything emotional felt dangerous on a screen that might not be private. Her reply came quickly the next day. "I can meet you after school. You're not bothering me." I drove to the school with my shoulders tight and my stomach hollow. The parking lot smelled like hot pavement and cut grass, and the late afternoon sun sat low, turning windshields into bright mirrors. I waited near the side entrance, away from the line of parents, until Ms. Alvarez waved me in. She didn't pity me. That was the first thing I noticed. She pulled 2 chairs into a quiet corner near the bookshelf and looked at me like I was capable, not broken. "I found cameras," I whispered. Saying it out loud made it sound even more unreal. Ms. Alvarez nodded once, calm and steady. "You're not crazy," she said. "This is control." Something inside me loosened so suddenly it almost hurt. I'd been living in a fog of self-doubt for so long that hearing a simple, clear sentence felt like air. She asked careful questions about Eli's drawings, his fear, Mark's comments. When I tried to soften it, tried to joke the way I always did, she didn't let me slide into denial. "I think you should speak to the school counselor," she said gently, "and you need to document everything, dates, screenshots, what was said, what you found. Facts matter." A plan. Not Mark's plan. Not a plan built on keeping him happy. My pulse still raced, but beneath it was a tiny flicker of power, like a match struck in a dark room. When I got back to my car, my phone started vibrating nonstop. "Where are you? Answer me. Don't start problems." Each message felt like a leash tug. I didn't reply. I took screenshots one after another, my hands shaking but steady enough to capture proof. That night, while Mark showered upstairs and the house filled with the hiss of running water, I shut myself in the laundry room and called my inheritance trustee. The dryer smelled like warm detergent and clean cotton. "I need to confirm my account status," I said, voice thin. "It's solely in your name," the trustee replied. "No one else has access." Untouched. Relief hit me like oxygen, a lifeline Mark couldn't freeze. When I came home a little later, Mark stood in the hallway smiling, holding Eli's backpack like he'd been waiting for a cue. "We're going to have a family talk," he said, practiced calm, making my stomach tighten, because in this house, a talk was never just a talk. Mark set the living room up like a stage. The TV stayed off, no cartoons, no noise to soften anything, just the ticking wall clock and the low hum of the fridge bleeding in from the kitchen. The lamps cast a warm, family glow that felt fake against my skin. "Buddy, come sit," Mark said gently, patting the middle cushion like Eli was a guest. Eli climbed up slowly, knees tucked in, hands twisting in his lap. He looked small on that wide couch, swallowed by throw pillows Mark kept arranged like a magazine photo. I hovered near the doorway, half in the room, half trying to disappear. Mark sat beside Eli, close enough to look protective, not touching, like he understood touch could be witnessed too. "We're just having a little family talk," Mark said, smiling. His eyes flicked to me like a warning. "Don't ruin this." Then he turned to Eli and asked, sweet as sugar, "Do you feel safe with Mommy?" My stomach clenched hard. The cruelty of it was so quiet. He wasn't checking on Eli. He was using him, turning my child into a witness against me while he wore his good dad face. Eli glanced at me, eyes wide for a heartbeat, then dropped his gaze to his hands. I don't want anyone to be mad," he whispered. Mark nodded slowly, like that proved everything. "See?" he murmured, still gentle. "That tension, it's not fair to you." "Mark," I said, stepping forward. His voice sharpened without rising. "Don't interrupt," he said calmly. "You'll scare him." The words landed like a slap because they sounded reasonable, like I was the danger just for speaking. Gaslighting dressed as parenting. Mark kept his tone soft. "Sometimes Mommy gets confused," he told Eli. "She worries too much. She thinks people are against her when they're not." I watched Eli absorb it. I watched my son learn a story about me I didn't write. His shoulders curled inward, and he nodded faintly like agreeing was the safest way to end the moment. "And if anyone asks questions," Mark continued, smiling, "you just tell the truth, okay? Mommy loves you. She just gets worked up." Worked up, like my fear was a defect. Eli whispered, "Okay," and my throat burned so badly I couldn't speak. After Eli went to bed, Mark followed me into the hallway. The kitchen light threw a pale stripe across the floor, and the house smelled like dish soap and Eli's bubble bath shampoo. Mark leaned close enough that I could feel his breath. "If the school calls anyone," he murmured, "I'll tell them you're unstable." He paused, then added softly, "And you know who they'll believe." The next morning, sunlight made the entryway look innocent. Eli came downstairs with his backpack, eyes tired. At the door, he slipped something folded into my coat pocket and whispered, "Hide it." Then he walked out like he'd just handed me contraband, and my fingers closed around the paper like it could change everything. The folded paper Eli slipped into my coat pocket felt heavier than it should have. It pressed against my ribs as I drove, like a secret with sharp corners. My hand stayed on the wheel, but my fingers kept twitching toward it. Every stop sign felt too long. Every passing car felt like eyes. At a red light, I finally pulled it out. The sun flashed off the hood in a hard glare, and the air inside the car smelled like stale coffee and Eli's apple-scented sanitizer. The paper trembled in my hand so badly I had to grip it with both fingers just to keep it still. I couldn't breathe until I unfolded it. Eli had drawn the locked door again, thick black lines, jagged scribbles around it like danger. But this time it had words in messy, uneven letters. Dad's room. My throat tightened. Beneath the door, he'd drawn me as a tiny stick figure standing outside, arms hanging like I didn't know what to do. Behind me was Eli, smaller, almost hidden, like he was learning to stay out of sight even in his own house. The light turned green. A horn beeped behind me. I jolted, shoved the drawing back into my pocket, and drove home with my chest tight, like a strap was cinched around my lungs. That afternoon, Mark left for work with his usual kiss on the head for Eli and a casual, "Try to have a normal day," as if normal was something I could choose. As soon as his car backed out and the garage door groaned shut, the quiet in the house sharpened. I went straight to the hallway closet Mark always kept locked. It sat across from the bathroom, plain white door, nothing special, except Mark never let me touch it. I wrapped my hand around the knob. Cold metal. No movement. For a second, I stood there, listening to my own breathing, hearing Mark's voice in my head. Snooping again? Trying to prove I'm the bad guy? My stomach churned, but I walked to the kitchen and yanked open the junk drawer. Batteries, rubber bands, a broken pen, old coupons. My fingers dug deeper, frantic and precise. Then I saw it. Taped underneath the drawer where you'd never look unless you were searching. A small silver key. Of course. Mark trusted hiding places more than he distrusted me. I peeled the tape off slowly and carried the key back down the hall. The lock turned easily. The click sounded loud, final. Inside, there weren't tools. There weren't holiday decorations. There were folders, stacks of paper, printed emails clipped together like evidence. The smell of ink and dusty paper hit my nose. I flipped through one folder and saw dates and notes in Mark's handwriting. Crying, raised voice, refused to calm down. As if my feelings were incidents in a report. Then I found a draft document with an official-looking header, Emergency Petition. My name was typed under the words, Erratic Behavior. My hands shook so hard the pages rustled. At the bottom of the stack was a receipt for a therapist I'd never met, paid under my name. I stared at it until my vision blurred and the truth landed like nausea. Mark wasn't just watching me. He was building a case. The counselor's office smelled like lavender spray and warm plastic from laminated posters. A little diffuser hummed on a shelf beneath a chart that said, "Breathe," as if breathing fixed everything. I sat in the chair facing Tessa's desk, hands folded tight in my lap while Mark walked in smiling like the safest man alive. He shook Tessa's hand with both of his, complimented the school, called everyone amazing, then leaned back like he was settling into a meeting he couldn't lose. "We're worried about her emotional stability," he said, gesturing toward me as if I were a file on the desk, not a person. "Eli's been caught in the middle." Tessa's eyes flicked to me, sympathetic. Before I could speak, Linda from the PTA appeared in the doorway with a clipboard. "Just dropping off forms," she chirped, then stayed, lingering like she'd smelled gossip. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself with emotion Mark could twist. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the desk, copies only, neat and labeled. "I'm worried about surveillance and coercive control," I said calmly. Mark's smile faltered by a millimeter. Tessa's posture shifted, less friendly, more professional. "What do you mean by surveillance?" "I found cameras in our home," I said, voice steady, pointed at the living room and a shared cloud folder of edited clips labeled incidents. Mark let out a soft laugh. "This is exactly what I mean, paranoia. Lots of families have—" "Mark," Tessa interrupted gently, "please let her finish." I tapped my phone and put it on speaker. "This is Dr. Priya Singh," a warm, direct voice said. "I completed an intake with Eli. He showed anxiety markers and used consistent fear language, including, 'Mom gets in trouble for talking.'" Mark's jaw tightened. I slid one more document forward. "I also found a drafted emergency petition," I said, "with my name under erratic behavior." Tessa looked down, then back up, her face changing into something procedural. "We have to file a report and create a safety plan," she said. Mark stood up too fast. The chair legs scraped loud against the floor. His eyes cut into mine, cold, furious, because he knew in that moment he'd just lost control of the story. Mark came home that night with a quiet rage that didn't slam doors or raise voices. It filled the hallway like smoke, thick, invisible, choking. I heard his key turn slowly, the latch clicking with careful control, and my body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders up, breath shallow. The house went still. "Hey," he called, voice soft, almost pleasant. That was the scariest version of him, the calm one. Eli's nightlight glowed under his door. I stood in the kitchen wiping a counter that was already clean, just to keep my hands busy. Mark stepped into the doorway, cologne cutting through the smell of dish soap, and watched me like I was a show. "So," he said quietly, "you really did it." I kept my voice flat. "Did what?" He smiled, sharp at the edges. "Weaponized the school," he murmured. "Turned our private life into a report, a safety plan." The humiliation wasn't loud, it was surgical. "You think anyone cares?" he asked, like it was funny. "A counselor and a teacher? They'll move on, they always do, and you'll still be here." My stomach tightened, but I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. I just stood there, palms damp, face hot under the harsh kitchen light. He held out his hand. "Give me your phone," he said, gentle enough to sound reasonable. "Eli doesn't need more drama. I'm protecting him." "No," I said. The word felt like stepping onto thin ice. Mark's smile didn't disappear. It sharpened. "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "Then I'll freeze the accounts. Let's see how brave you feel." He walked away like he'd mentioned the weather. A minute later, I heard soft tapping upstairs, his thumbs on his screen, calm and efficient. I left to get gas, telling him Eli needed something for school. Mark didn't stop me. He just watched with that same thin smile, like he already knew what would happen. Under the harsh white canopy lights at the station, I slid my card into the pump. The machine beeped, thought for a second, then flashed red, declined. I tried again. Same result. The screen glowed bright while a car idled behind me, and I could feel strangers' impatience on my back. My cheeks burned as I fumbled, pretending it was a bank glitch, but my stomach knew the truth. Mark's punishment delivered by machine. I drove home on fumes and went straight to the one account he couldn't touch, my inheritance. The laptop's glow felt like oxygen. I paid for a consultation with Gwen Harper, and the relief wasn't comfort. It was air. On the call, Gwen listened without emotion, just focus. When I finished, she said one sentence that turned my blood cold. If he's preparing a petition, he may try to take Eli fast. We move before he does. Gwen Harper's office smelled like coffee and toner, and the sound of a printer humming behind a closed door made everything feel strangely real. For the first time in weeks, the chaos had edges, not just dread and guessing, forms, dates, steps, leverage. A world where Mark's charm didn't matter as much as what could be proven. Gwen slid a legal pad toward me. "We build this like a timeline," she said calmly. "No emotions, facts. When did you find the cameras? When did he threaten you? When did he freeze funds?" My hands still shook, but answering her questions felt like turning a flashlight on in a room Mark had kept dark. Gwen wrote quickly, neat and sharp, translating my fear into ink. We filed for emergency temporary orders. We requested removal of surveillance devices. We drafted a documented custody schedule that centered Eli's safety. Pickup times, exchange locations, communication through writing only. Gwen explained each page before I signed, her voice steady. She didn't promise miracles. She promised procedure, and procedure felt like oxygen. By the time I stepped outside, my phone buzzed like it was angry at me. Mark's texts stacked up fast. "You're kidnapping my son. Answer me. Bring him home. Don't do this." His words were designed to shame me into backing down, to make me feel like protecting my child was a crime. But I was following a court-approved plan. I didn't respond. I took screenshots and forwarded them to Gwen, even though my stomach churned with every vibration. Dr. Priya Singh began formal sessions with Eli that week. Her office smelled like gentle soap and crayons, and Eli sat with his shoulders tight, fingers picking at a sleeve seam. Dr. Singh noticed everything, his shallow breaths, the way his eyes dropped when home was mentioned, the fear language that slipped out in fragments. Each note she documented felt like a brick in a wall I was building quietly around my son. Gwen also brought in Noah Klein, a forensic accountant with a calm, timeline-driven voice. He asked for statements, transfer records, anything I could legally provide. He didn't react emotionally, he just traced patterns. A few days later, he said, "I'm seeing unusual transfers." My chest tightened. "What kind?" "Labeled consulting," he replied. "But the timing overlaps with surveillance purchases and legal preparation. It suggests concealment." Financial abuse layered on top of coercion. Mark wasn't just controlling my voice, he was controlling my options. That night, my email chimed, bright in the dark room. From Mark. Subject line, "Last chance to fix this." Attached was a polished petition, edited, ready to file, filled with words like erratic and unstable, dressed up as concern. At the end, he wrote, "If you cooperate, we can keep this private." I stared at that line until my vision blurred. He didn't see terror as abuse. He saw it as negotiation. The courthouse hallway smelled like floor wax and old paper, and the lights were so bright they made everyone look washed out and tired. My shoes squeaked on the polished tile, and I hated that sound. Small, nervous, noticeable. I held Eli's hand, feeling his fingers cling tighter each time a door opened and shut somewhere down the hall. Mark walked in smiling at strangers like he was campaigning. He nodded at a bailiff, greeted a woman with files, laughed at something his attorney said just a little too loudly. His suit fit perfectly, his hair was neat, and he wore that same public warmth that always made people assume he was safe. He shook his attorney's hand with a big, confident grin, then bent and kissed Eli's head for the audience. Eli stiffened, then went still, like he'd learned how to disappear inside his own body. Mark didn't look at me, not once. He acted like I wasn't there, like I was a shadow on the wall. Humiliation by erasure. Quiet, clean, surgical. Inside the courtroom, the air felt cooler, drier, smelling of wood and printer ink. Papers slid. Chairs scraped softly. Gwen sat beside me, calm, her folder squared on the table like armor. When Mark spoke, he did it with that controlled sadness that sounded reasonable to strangers. "She's become paranoid," he told the judge, "and she's been influenced by a teacher." He said it like every woman who speaks up must be coached, like I couldn't possibly have a mind of my own. He talked about me without saying my name, emotional, overreactive, fixated. Then he lowered his voice and looked toward Eli like a devoted father. "I just want stability for my son." My throat burned, but I kept still. I knew this was the trap. If I reacted, he'd point and say, "See?" Gwen didn't argue emotion. She didn't debate his tone. She submitted documentation, photos of the cameras inside our home, screenshots of the cloud folder labeled incidents, metadata showing dates and file names, Dr. Singh's notes documenting Eli's anxiety markers, and the phrase, "Mom gets in trouble for talking." She laid out the timeline of threats and financial freezes with screenshots and bank alerts. Mark's attorney tried to minimize it. "This is marital conflict," he said lightly, "a couple having disagreements." The judge's eyes narrowed when Gwen referenced edited recordings. "Edited?" the judge repeated, and the word landed like ice in the room. Even courts can smell manipulation. The judge leaned forward. "Temporary protections are ordered," he said firmly, "and I'm ordering preservation of all digital evidence. No deletion, no alteration." Mark's jaw ticked, one small involuntary twitch, like his mask had cracked for a second. He stared ahead, still polished, still quiet. But I saw it. His favorite weapon, control of the story, was now evidence. Mark's downfall didn't arrive with shouting or sirens or some dramatic public meltdown. It arrived the way real consequences do, quietly, in inboxes and envelopes, in subject lines that didn't care how charming he was, in subpoenas that didn't laugh at his jokes, in IT logs that didn't blink when he smiled. The first time I felt it shift, I was sitting at my kitchen table in the small rental Gwen had advised me to use for exchanges and paperwork. Neutral ground, she'd called it. The table was cheap, the surface slightly rough under my fingertips, and the overhead light buzzed faintly. My coffee had gone cold, untouched, because my stomach stayed in that constant tight knot now, like my body was waiting for the next hit. Gwen's email came through with a simple line: "Discovery request served. Preservation notices acknowledged." It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like machinery turning on. Then Noah called. His voice was always calm, timeline-driven, like he spoke in spreadsheets, even when he was on the phone. "I traced the consulting line items," he said. "It wasn't just personal spending." I gripped the edge of the table. What was it? "Mark billed consulting expenses through a workplace account," Noah said, matter of fact. "But the money didn't go to a vendor. It was funneled into a private fund, and the dates overlap with the surveillance device purchases and legal prep payments." I closed my eyes. In my head, I saw Mark's face when he froze the accounts. Calm, satisfied. The way he'd said, "Let's see how brave you feel." I'd thought it was cruelty for cruelty's sake. No, it was strategy. It was funding. "It's misconduct," Noah added. "Potentially serious. If his employer audits, they'll see it." After we hung up, my hands sat on the table for a long time, palms flat as if I could press myself into steadiness. My fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being fog and started becoming lines, cause and effect, paper trails, patterns. The school district, now alerted, moved in their own quiet way, not with announcements, just requests, interviews, documentation. Tessa, the school counselor, sent Gwen a summary of Mark's interactions after the report, how he'd tried to clarify things, how he'd pushed for private meetings, how he'd framed me as unstable in subtle, practiced language, pressure tactics, written down in professional terms, the kind of words that didn't sound emotional but carried weight. Ms. Alvarez provided her own notes, dates, and quotes, the phrase that kept returning like a bruise: "Mom gets in trouble for talking." And Linda, loud, social Linda, did something even more telling. She stopped. No more posts with Mark at PTA events. No more best dad captions under photos where he held a bake sale tray like a trophy. She didn't send me an apology. She didn't admit anything. She just went quiet, like a rat sensing the ship wasn't safe anymore. Then came the court-appointed evaluator. The evaluator's office was bland and beige, smelling faintly of hand sanitizer and old carpet. Eli sat beside me on a low couch, his knees bouncing. A toy bin sat in the corner with board games, missing pieces, and a bucket of dull crayons. The evaluator spoke gently, asked simple questions, watched more than she talked. When Mark arrived, his performance turned on instantly. Calm voice, slow nods, concerned sighs. The perfect father who was just trying to co-parent. But the evaluator didn't watch his face the way strangers did. She watched Eli's body. When Mark said, "We just want honesty," Eli flinched. A small jerk of his shoulder like the word had teeth. When Mark said, "Your mom gets confused sometimes," Eli's eyes dropped to his shoes, and his fingers went straight to his sleeve seam, rubbing hard enough to twist the fabric. The evaluator noted it all, quietly, clinically. Physical cues, fear responses, the way Eli tensed at certain phrases, the way he avoided looking at Mark when Mark spoke about truth. And for the first time, Mark's calm began to look like strategy, not stability. Then his employer stepped in. I didn't hear it from Mark, of course I didn't. I heard it the way you hear social shifts, through silence, through the absence of what used to be automatic. A dad from school who used to wave at Mark suddenly looked away when we passed each other in the pickup line. A neighborhood group chat I'd been in for years went quiet around my name. Invitations stopped appearing. The PTA newsletter that always seemed to include Mark's photo suddenly featured someone else. And then Gwen forwarded me a notice. Employer administrative leave pending review. It was just a sentence. One line on letterhead. But I could almost feel Mark's good dad image evaporating in real time. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in that quiet, social way where doors don't slam. They just don't open for you anymore. Gwen negotiated steadily through it all. She didn't posture. She didn't gloat. She focused on terms that protected Eli. Mandated parenting classes, restrictions on monitoring or recording, communication through a court app only, exchanges in public places, or supervised when needed. No direct contact outside legal channels. Financial restitution addressed in a separate track. Each term was a boundary made enforceable. And Mark hated enforceable boundaries more than anything. The night he called me, it was late, after 11. The rental was dark except for the bluish glow of the microwave clock. The air smelled like laundry detergent and the cheap vanilla candle I'd lit to make the place feel less temporary. Eli was asleep in the next room, his little breaths soft and even. My phone buzzed. Mark's name lit the screen. For a second, my body wanted to ignore it, to protect the calm. But Gwen had told me to document everything, and part of me needed to hear the tone in his voice now that the world was no longer applauding him. I answered without speaking. There was a pause. Then Mark exhaled shakily. Actually shaky. I'd never heard that from him. His voice came out low and strained. "You're ruining me," he whispered. The words hung there, naked and desperate. No charm, no lecture, no careful performance. I didn't respond. My hand was steady on the phone. My heart still raced, but it wasn't from fear alone anymore. Mark swallowed hard. "My job," he started, then stopped, like saying it out loud made it real. "People are looking at me like he was what he'd been doing to me all along." He tried to pull himself back together. "We can fix this," he said, voice trembling around the edges. "Just stop. Tell them you overreacted." And in that moment, I understood something clean and sharp. The next move wasn't about winning. It was about ending this, cleanly, legally, permanently, so my son never had to whisper, "Hide it," again. The mediation room felt like every office I'd ever been intimidated in. Too bright, too cold, the air smelling faintly of burnt coffee and copier toner. A bowl of stale mints sat in the center of the table like a joke. The chairs were the kind that pretended to be comfortable but forced your spine into attention. Mark arrived early. Of course he did. He sat with his jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable, hands clasped like a man trying to do the right thing. When I walked in with Gwen, he smiled, small, controlled, like we were about to negotiate a business contract instead of the rest of our lives. "Let's just end this," he said, voice calm, almost kind, "for Eli." Then he slid a paper across the table as if he were offering a gift. "I'll make sure you're taken care of," he added, and the words landed like a slap because they were wrapped in generosity while still implying ownership. The number he offered wasn't even impressive. It was money he'd already controlled, money he'd frozen, rerouted, used to punish me, presented now as if he were choosing to be merciful. Humiliation disguised as peace. Gwen didn't even blink. She glanced down once, then pushed the paper back toward him with 2 fingers, like it wasn't worth touching. "We're not here for a performance," she said, voice level. "We're here for enforceable terms." Mark's smile tightened. "Enforceable," he repeated softly, like the word offended him. Gwen opened her folder and began laying out documents with calm precision. Supervised exchanges at a neutral location, no devices capable of recording inside either home during parenting time, no access to my accounts, communication through a court-approved app only, financial restitution based on Noah's tracing, a custody schedule aligned with Dr. Singh's therapy recommendations, including consistency, limited conflict exposure, and strict boundaries. Mark leaned back, eyes narrowing, and let out a quiet laugh. "This is extreme," he said, and his gaze slid to me like he expected me to flinch. "She's making me out to be some kind of criminal." I kept my hands folded in my lap, nails pressing lightly into my palm. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but I didn't give him my voice. My voice had been his favorite toy. I wasn't handing it over anymore. Mark tried another angle, soft at first, then sharper when soft didn't work. "You're bitter," he said with that practiced sadness. "You're unstable. You're vindictive. You want to punish me because you got embarrassed." There it was, the bait, the same old hook. Make me react, make me look crazy, point and say, "See?" I stared at the table edge instead of his face and breathed slowly through my nose. The room's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere down the hall a copier whirred, churning out paper like the world ran on evidence, not charm. Gwen spoke for me, calm, clean, unemotional. These terms reflect documented coercive control, surveillance, and retaliatory financial restriction, she said. They also reflect the child's therapeutic needs. Mark scoffed. "Therapy," he muttered, like it was a fad. "Kids get nervous. That doesn't mean—" Dr. Singh's report was placed on the table next. Progress markers, documented improvement when routines were stable, warnings about setbacks if conflict escalated. Gwen didn't raise her voice when she slid it forward. She didn't have to. "The therapist notes regression risk with instability," Gwen said. "If Mr. Reynolds objects to consistent scheduling and reduced conflict exposure, he'll need to explain why he's prioritizing his preferences over Eli's clinical needs." For the first time, Mark didn't have a smooth response, because any argument now sounded like he didn't care about his child, and his image, his precious good dad mask, was already cracking. The mediator asked questions. Gwen answered with dates, documents, and plain language. I sat quietly, letting my calm be the boundary Mark couldn't climb. Every time he tried to pull me into emotion, I stayed still. Every time he tried to provoke, Gwen redirected to terms, paper, procedure, proof. Hours later, the agreement was finalized. I watched Mark sign his name, pen scratching slowly across the page like it cost him something physical. When it was my turn, my hand shook for a second, not from fear of him, but from the weight of what I was ending. Then I signed. Mark stared at me like I'd taken something from him. And maybe I had. Not money, not reputation, not even the marriage he'd already hollowed out. I'd taken his ability to control me. As we stood, Mark leaned in just slightly, close enough that only I could hear him. His voice was low, almost tender, the way poison can sound when it wants to be swallowed. "He'll hate you for this," he said. I didn't answer. I picked up my bag, nodded once to Gwen, and walked out of the room without looking back. Because for the first time, leaving didn't feel like running. It felt like choosing. My new place was smaller, but it breathed. The first night Eli and I slept there, I lay awake listening to the quiet and realizing it sounded different when it wasn't waiting to hurt you. The air smelled like clean laundry and the lemony floor cleaner the landlord used between tenants. The hallway outside our door was still, no heavy footsteps pacing above me, no keys hitting a counter like a warning, no tiny red light blinking from a shelf, reminding me I was being watched even when I cried. The windows faced a courtyard with a tired little tree and a patch of grass that needed watering. The blinds were thin, the couch was secondhand, and the kitchen drawers stuck if you pulled them too fast. None of it matched the perfect home we used to have on paper. But my shoulders didn't rise every time the floor creaked. I kept catching myself doing old habits, lowering my voice in my own kitchen, pausing before opening a cabinet, checking corners with my eyes like cameras grew there naturally. Then I'd remember. There was no one here to punish me for existing. The relief came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes so sudden it made me dizzy. Eli adjusted faster than I expected, but not without moments that broke me. The first week, he walked softly as if he still needed to be quiet to be good. He asked permission before turning on the TV. He flinched when I sighed too heavily, like a normal adult exhale meant anger was coming. And every time that happened, I wanted to go back in time and pull him out sooner. One Saturday morning, sunlight spilled across our small dining table in warm squares. I was folding towels, the cotton soft and warm from the dryer, when Eli hovered near the table with a pack of crayons in his hands. He didn't open them right away. He stood there, eyes flicking to my face, waiting for some invisible rule to appear. "You can draw," I told him softly. He swallowed. "It's okay?" "It's okay," I repeated, and my voice shook a little because I knew what that sentence used to cost him. He sat down slowly and began to draw. At first, it was cautious, small lines, careful shapes, then his hand started moving faster, like he was remembering something he'd been forced to forget. The scratch of crayon on paper filled the room, steady and innocent, and I realized I'd missed that sound like you miss music after living in silence. When he slid the paper toward me, I felt my throat tighten before I even looked. It was sunlight. A park, 2 small stick figures holding hands, no locked doors, no towering shadow taking up half the page, no mouthless mother, just 2 figures with simple smiles standing under a bright yellow sun that took up the corner like it had always been allowed to exist. I stared at it, and my eyes burned. I pressed my fingers over my lips, but tears still slipped out, quietly, not because I had to hide them, because I didn't. Eli watched me with that serious little face and whispered, "Did I do it wrong?" I shook my head fast. "No, baby," I said, voice thick. "You did it right." Mark tried to reach me in the weeks after the agreement. At first, it was emails that pretended to be apologies, but sounded like excuses. I never meant to scare anyone. You know I was under stress. I did what I thought I had to do. Then, when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. The same pattern, different packaging. "You're poisoning him against me. You're making me look like a monster. You'll regret this." I saved every message. Screenshots, PDFs, dates. A folder on my laptop labeled simply, "Documents." I didn't reply. Silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was discipline. Dr. Singh helped Eli put names to feelings he'd been swallowing. She gave him language for what he used to carry like shame. Scared, nervous, confused, angry, safe. She taught him that feelings weren't evidence against him. They were information. That truth wasn't something you hid to keep peace. It was something you spoke to create it. Slowly, the tightness in his throat loosened. He stopped whispering as much. He started asking for what he needed without looking around for punishment. Healing didn't look like a perfect smile. It looked like small moments. Eli laughing too loud, leaving crayons on the table, running down the hallway without flinching at his own footsteps. Today, I know dignity is not silence. It is choosing the truth, even when your voice shakes. Now I understand the drawing didn't destroy our family. It exposed what was already destroying us. And sometimes, when Eli asks for crayons, I still hold my breath for 1 second, an old reflex, then I let it go. Because the only thing that matters now is that my son is free to tell the truth.